Hi, I'm Samantha Tappenbeck,
Hi, I'm Fiona Handler.
and we're from the Flathead Conservation District. Welcome to the Forestry Expo Riparian Station. So we are standing next to Trumble Creek, and you might hear the water in the background. Where does the water in Trumble Creek come from? Well, here in northwest Montana, rain and snow falls across the landscape. In the wintertime, that snow and ice is stored high up in the mountains. So once the spring starts to come around and temperatures warm up, that snow and ice starts to melt, and that water infiltrates into the ground, it absorbs into the soil, and then it fills streams and creeks that are high in the mountains. The water runs out of the mountains. Those creeks join together with other creeks and they form larger streams. Those streams join together with other streams and form rivers. Sometimes those streams and rivers flow into lakes and to wetlands. And a lot of times that water that's melting out of the mountains directly fills those wetlands and lakes all across our landscape. So all of that water is running out of the mountains across the landscape, and all of the land where that rain and that snow fall across is considered a watershed. So I want to talk about a really unique feature of watersheds. It's a very special zone between the water and the land, and it's a zone that we call the riparian zone. So in the riparian zone, you will find water-loving plants growing. So plants that grow in riparian zones are plants like cottonwood, willows, red osier dogwood, Rocky Mountain maple, snowberry, serviceberry, and other shrubs like that. You'll also find some of the normal forest species like you would expect, like fir and spruce and larch and pines. All of these plants you'll find growing in the riparian zone. Another feature of the riparian zone is the layers of soil and sand and moss and debris that falls out of the vegetation, like branches and leaves. They form this layer on the forest floor. So if you look down on the forest floor, you'll see it. And we call that the duff layer. And it serves a really important purpose in the riparian zone. So I want to talk about some of the really important services that the riparian zone provides. So when all of that water is running out of the mountains and it's running across the landscape, the riparian zone will act like a sponge, and it will absorb that water up, and it'll recharge the groundwater that's below the forest floor. And as the season goes along and the temperatures get hotter, what the riparian zone will do, now that it has absorbed that water, is start to slowly release it back out. So what you'll see is that streams flowing in July and August, when it's really hot outside, they still have water in them. Even though the snow is long gone from the mountains, it's slowly creeping out of the riparian zone where it's been held underground. So that provides really important habitat for the fish and insects that live in the creek, which otherwise wouldn't have a source of water so late in the season. The riparian zone also has a lot of vegetation growing in it. So all kinds of plants, from shrubs, moss, and trees, provide really high quality habitat for many different bird and mammal species that you find in our forests. So you'll find in the springtime so many bird nests, because it's really good habitat for birds because they can find food, they can find shelter, and they have access to all kinds of resources in that special zone between the water and the land that we call the riparian zone. So all of those plants growing in the riparian zone, they grow from tiny little seeds all the way up to big shrubs and trees, and eventually, like all living things, they'll die. And that's not where their story ends. So The vegetation that's growing in the riparian zone is important while it's living. It's also important when it dies. When trees die, the snags that are left standing provide important habitat for birds that are looking for cavities, mammals that are looking for cavities to nest and take shelter. Also, when plants die, they might stay standing for a while, but eventually they will probably fall over, and sometimes they'll fall over directly into the creek. And so what you'll find is that when you look at a stream, you'll see logs that have fallen down, you'll see branches that have gotten trapped, and all kinds of debris that builds up around that fallen debris in the creek. And that itself is excellent habitat for the animals that live underwater too. So when they're growing on the land, they provide habitat for those land animals. When they die and they fall in the water, they provide excellent habitat and sources of food for all of the fish and insects and other critters that live underwater as well. Another really important service that the riparian zone provides is stabilization. So all of those rooted plants that are growing in the riparian zone, they have deep roots that extend down deep into the earth. And the function that that provides is to stabilize that land. So you can imagine when water starts to run off from the mountains, it has a lot of power. It carries a lot of energy. And during floods, when water breaks free from the channel and goes onto the land, it's carrying a lot of power, and it will tend to erode that soil and that land away. So it'll start to break away unless there is something there to stabilize it. So roots from that vegetation growing in the riparian area will slow flood water. It will disperse some of that high energy in the water that is flowing past, and it'll keep that soil and the land in place so it doesn't wash away during those flood events. When that water moves across the riparian area and it's moving across the landscape, the riparian area provides another really important service to help clean up that water. So that duff layer that we talked about before, which is the layer of soil and sand and woody debris and moss and leaves, is sitting in distinct layers across the forest floor. As the water runs across those layers, the duff layer and the rooted vegetation that is growing into the soil will actually filter out pollutants from the water that it may have picked up along the way as it traveled across the land. So it will actually clean the water. It slows it down, it cleans the water as it passes through, and as a result, the water that eventually makes it to the stream is much cleaner than it was when it traveled across the landscape. So all of those plants that are growing in the riparian area, they provide even another important service to the landscape and to the creek. So as they grow big and tall, they spread out with their branches, they leaf out, and they provide a lot of shade. And you'll notice if you walk from an area that's farther away from a creek down into the riparian area next to the creek, you'll see a change in temperature. And that's because all of those plants growing in the riparian area are blocking really powerful rays of the sun from reaching the forest floor and from reaching the waters of the creek. And that shade will help to keep water temperatures cool during the very hottest parts of the month or of the year, which is important because many of the animals that live in streams, like insects and fish, are adapted. They're used to a very specific temperature, and they usually require cold temperatures. So that shade that the plants provide growing on the banks of the stream is really important for keeping temperatures cool on the land and in the water. And finally, those plants that are growing in the riparian area, they're really doing good work to shade the stream and the forest, they're also growing over top of the stream. So you'll see branches that are reached out over the stream. And as a result, you'll get things like leaves and branches, and even insects that are crawling along those leaves and branches fall into the stream. And that provides really important food for the insects and the fish that are living in the stream, and it provides really important habitat for them as well. We talked about a little bit how when plants fall into the stream after they've died, they provide good cover and shelter and habitat for animals. They'll also change the way that the stream flows. So you'll see things like waterfalls where water is cascading over fallen logs and branches, and that's important because it's introducing what we call turbulence to the stream. So it's churning that water up, and you'll see more bubbles in that water, and in those bubbles is air. And so as a result, you'll have more oxygen available to breathe underwater. So now we're going to do a demonstration of one of those really important services that the riparian zone provides. We're going to take a look at how the duff layer filters water.
Hi everyone, I'm going to be showing you a demonstration that Sam was just talking about, and this is going to be showing you the difference between a natural environment and an urban environment. And Samantha was talking a lot about the duff layer, which is the layer in the forest floor that incorporates sand and dirt and leaves and moss and all this stuff you see in front of me. And then on the other side, we have a bunch of big concrete rocks that may look pretty similar to things that you find outside of your house or in parking lots or any sort of city limits. And so I just want you to keep in mind while we're going through this, how the process of all of the stacking and the water going in and all of the materials kind of turn into all of the ideas that Samantha had just gone over. So we're just going to start off by putting these rocks in here. And another word for surfaces like this is that's called impervious surfaces. And impervious surfaces are surfaces that have trouble wicking water up, so the water just flows right through, which is not how natural sand and dirt function. So we have some nice fluffy moss. Also, just a side note, all of this stuff we found right here at the Forest Expo site, and you can, when you come and walk around, you can look for it and you can collect your own moss, and you can do this at home and try it out for yourself. Hopefully it doesn't tip over, because it would be very messy. But messy's kind of fun sometimes. Cool. Looking good. Alright, so next I'm going to fill both these mason jars up with some soil and with some oil, and that's representing what I was just talking about. When water moves through places, it gets soaked into that place or it moves through, and when it does move through, it's going to pick up everything that it passes. So there's dirt everywhere, and water will pick that up. And then, I'm sure as all of you know, cars have a lot of oil leaks or other pollutants that come out of them, so that's what this oil is representing. If you do this at home, don't drink this, because it won't be very good. It'll result in a stomach ache and unhappiness. Okay, so now that we have our nice yucky water that is representing all of, it's called storm water, all of the rain that's falling down, all the snow that's falling down that comes onto the mountains and eventually goes into our creeks and rivers and lakes, is in here. We're gonna pour it through each of these super slowly at the same time, and I want you all to take a minute or two and either talk amongst yourself or just think about what do you think the end result will be down here after pouring both of these waters, which are the same, into these two different places that are representing an urban environment and a natural environment. Alright, I hope you all got a chance to think about what you think is going to happen. And if you want, you can kind of think of it as a race in a way. Not necessarily for... Well, yeah. Think about it as a race. Just to make it kind of fun for your thought process. Alright. I wonder what's going to happen. Alright, here we go. Alright, so the first thing I'm noticing is that the water is going pretty quickly in our urban environment. If you just look at the volume level of where the water is, the water got really high really quickly over here. And then the other thing that's very noticeable is, my hands are all oily, I'm not going to pick anything up, but the color is very different. So over here, all of that dirt is still in the water, all of that oil is still in the water, and this water isn't exactly perfectly clean, but it's definitely a lot cleaner than what's over here. And so all this water just shot through here. So that's what we were talking about, that impervious surfaces, they don't really absorb the water, everything just flushes through and it takes up everything it can grab on its way. And the difference between what we were talking about, the duff layer, is it acts like a sponge. It's going to pick up not everything, but it's going to have a lot more time to pick everything up. And so it's inevitable that we create pollution and we create oil and everything like that, but what this is serving for us is that it's allowing time and it's allowing a service for us to clean out water so it can go back into our creeks and back into our rivers and it can be clean. And here in Northwest Montana, we're very lucky. We are surrounded by beautiful watersheds, and in order for us to continue enjoying all of those watersheds, we have to do things to protect these areas, like where I'm standing as well. And then everyone can continue to enjoy them for a long time.